Hey, John Morris here with howtomakemywebsite.com, and in this video we're going to create a basic form that will allow you to add data to a MySQL or MySQL database using PHP. So the first thing that I want to cover right away, just kind of to get it out of the way, is the actual form itself, because I'm sure there will be some people who kind of get hung up on this part of it, but it's actually incredibly simple. When you're using PHP with a form, the form itself doesn't necessarily actually have any PHP in it, and it doesn't have to. Majority of the time it'll actually just be a regular old HTML form. Okay, so in case you don't know, the way that works is you start it off just like if you've been through the Web Design 101 course, and we've talked about HTML tags, and you're going to have an HTML tag called form, and then inside that form you're just going to define some attributes. So the two that you need to have are the form action, and what that action is that's the page that this form is going, or the browser is going to send all the data that is entered in this form. It's the page that it's going to send that data to. And so what this page actually is going to be your PHP. It's going to be the page of your PHP script that's going to process that information. So that it's going to be the page that we spend most of our time on. Then there's going to be the method. So there's two methods, post and get. If you want to look that up, the difference between the two, that's fine. For the most part, you're probably going to be sticking with post. It's generally the recommended method. So 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, this is going to be post. But if you want to look that up, go ahead and go for it. And then of course you can see down here we have our closing form tags, and then inside there what we have is our actual input. So you can see we have a paragraph tag, and we just type out input 1, and this is just going to be kind of the label for this input, which is going to be a text box. And then there's a number of different form elements. You can do an input, which is just a regular text box. You can do a text area, you can do a drop down box, you can do radio buttons, and so on. So again, they're all a little bit different syntax, and we'll get into that a little bit. But you can also, again, that's something that you probably already know, or you can look up pretty easily. There's nothing special about it. So here we have an input, just a regular text box. It's a text box and not a password box. The important thing here is the name. Okay, so when we use PHP to process data, we need our inputs to have a name so that we can, when we store it in the database, we can store it under a key, and then we can reference the data that was stored, the data that was input in that text box using the key. And that'll make sense, a lot more sense as we go forward. But really the important thing here is to make sure that all your inputs have names. That way they can be stored in the database. And then of course we close it, and then we close our paragraph tag, and then we have another input, which is just our submit button. That's pretty much what every submit button you'll ever make looks like. Granted, you can make image ones and do some fancy stuff like that, but we're not going to really talk about that in this course. So that is a very simple yet effective form, and if we go, you can see that this is what that looks like. And so we would insert our data in here, and then we'd hit submit, and it would send that data off to this demo.php page, which is going to be our script that we write that's going to process that information. So that's the HTML form. Again, you can pretty much construct these however you want. You just will have to write your code to accommodate how you build your form here. So how you build your HTML form is going to determine a lot with how you code this processing page, the page that processes and inputs the data. And of course you have to structure your database according to that as well. That's all going to make sense here in just a minute. Okay, so now this is our form, and this is the data that we have, or that we're gonna take in. Now we need some place to store it. So instead of diving right into PHP, we're actually going to come to our database here, and we're going to go again into our database, and I'm just going to create a new table. So if we come back here, we can create a new table. We're going to call this demo, and the number of fields we're going to give it 2. Okay, we're going to hit go. Alright, so again, we're creating we already have a database. We're just creating a table, which is like a sheet, and then we gave it 2 fields, which are like the columns going across. So we're just going to specify what those are. So again, this is where we're going to store our information. So as you can see here, we have 2 fields. The first one is just going to be one that's called an ID. You pretty much are always going to do this field, and what that is it gives the numbers for each row as it numbers down, so you can reference it that way. So you're pretty much always going to do this. It's going to be an integer. Attributes. Index is primary. It's going to be your primary key. You're going to auto increment, and that's pretty much it for that one. Now, this is pretty much always going to be like this, because again, that's your ID field. That's how you number your records. It's actually, if we come to our spreadsheet over here, we'll open this back up real quick. This ID field right here is like these numbers right here. Okay, MySQL by default doesn't have those in there, so you just create a field and you make the primary key, auto increment, and that pretty much creates these numbers right here, so that you can reference it. Now, this name right here is like these columns going across. So we have our ID column. Now we're going to have another column, and this is where you're going to kind of start to structure your database, and your form are going to work hand in hand. If you remember, I said that your inputs needed to have a name. That's because this name right here is going to correlate over here to this field, so that when you submit the form, then the data that's in this input box, which is this input box, is going to get stored in this field. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, the name of this, it doesn't have to be, but it's a good practice. The name of this field is the same as the form, so input 1. And if we come back to our code over here, we can see the name is input 1. Okay, so they correlate to each other. And alright, so let's go back over to our database. It's not going to be an integer. It's probably going to be, it could be a variable character, or we'll just do that. And it can be null, and yeah, we'll just leave it at that. We could put a limit on the text here, but we won't, just for these purposes. That's something when we get to security we'll talk about.